We're just waiting for Reverend Aaron Long to join us as we resume our discussion on Sola Scriptura. And here is Aaron now.
We're on time today, Don.
Pardon? What was that?
We're actually on time today.
We're
actually on time today.
Yeah.
My conversation with Andy ended early because his phone went out.
Oh, no. Okay.
Well, you know, I got to talk to Andy every week just to make McDonald happy.
Oh, Andy's your supervisor?
Yeah. We don't ever talk about my work. We always end up talking about everything else, but I've got to at least talk to him.
Yeah. How's Andy doing?
He's doing well. And he brought up something this morning that I think directly relates to the subject at hand. If you'll allow me to segue for a moment, it actually directly relates to all of your podcasts going on right now. Andy has been on a kick lately about talking about subscriptionism. And he said it's become almost a uniquely Reformed thing. And this is what me and him were talking about. If you look at Lutheran subscriptionism, in the Formula of Concord, it specifically states this is what we view to be the clear and unadulterated teaching of the Bible. So when a Lutheran confessional subscribes, they cannot dissent from any point because the subscription itself says this is the subscription that the document that they're subscribing to states that this is their view on what the Bible teaches.
Okay.
With Reformed circles, there is some weirdness that starts because of the revivalism and the individualism that crept in, going all the way back to where there seems to be this idea that you can subscribe and then take exceptions. And he said, and I agree with him, this is what me and him were batting back and forth. You cannot maintain doctrinal integrity within a church body while allowing exceptions to the subscribed faith of said church body. What may start out as I subscribe, but I take exception to A or B, whatever, is going to eventually turn into you are lying when you say you subscribe, so you end up undermining the solas, you end up undermining everything through exceptions. It's a death of 1,000 cuts. And he said, particularly with the PCA, but it's crept across NAPARC through things like the Gospel Coalition, through the Young, Restless, and Reform movement and all this, that they keep taking exceptions. And he said it started out with the particular Baptist trying to claim the term Reformed. Well, the moment you cut infant baptism out, all Reformed theology falls apart because you need infant baptism to support covenant theology. And without covenant theology, you don't have a solid biblical view of the Bible. But he said it's running rampant to the point where most, in his opinion, a good number of supposedly solidly subscribed Reformed guys aren't actually Reformed anymore because they've taken so many exceptions to their confession that they cannot honestly say they are what they are. Does that make any sense?
I understand what you are saying, I believe. I am just extremely slow to affirm that it's widespread or how many of the issues are at hand Is it 1,000? Is it 5 exceptions? I do realize that you can in the PCA take exceptions, but I don't know. In other words, I don't have a sociological statistical survey, which I like to know the numbers, which would require a massive amount of work going through presbytery by presbytery from east to west coast, and then examine the data. So I'm slow to draw a conclusion. That's just the way I'm wired. I'm kind
Well,
of
I'll give you an example of it in Anglicanism. All right. In the Anglican world, until I think it was the 1830s, it may be later, I can't remember, there was a required subscription to the 39 articles by anyone who would be an Anglican clergyman, correct?
yeah, well, I thought it went into the 20th century. I don't
Okay,
know.
well, maybe I'm saying I could be wrong
Okay.
on the date. What happens when that subscription is removed? You have the Trojan horse of the Anglo-Catholics, and I'll explain why I'm saying they're a Trojan horse in a moment, that automatically throw it out and they start putting on their drapes and poping everything up.
Yeah.
But they were a Trojan horse because what they were used by were the liberals. The liberals used the rancor and the fire of the Anglo-Catholics to get rid of the subscription so that they could come in and deconstruct the entire faith. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it was slow and gradual, but they did take over the apes and papes.
Right. And it's funny because I don't think the Anglo-Catholics realized they were used. They were used to let an almost more nefarious virus in that couldn't get in until the subscription was removed. What the subscription stands for is a firewall against all the diseases of the heresies that can creep in.
I don't know if like ACNA or MACNA, the Anglican Church of North America. I don't know if they give lip service to it, but
They give lip service. Okay. Donald, if you read their documents, they hold to the 39 articles in the 1662 Book of Common Prayer. It's automatically a lie because while they say they hold to the 1662, they turn around and they issue out that 2019 piece of garbage, Book of Common Prayer. They say they hold to the 39 articles, but then if you read their catechism to be a Christian, it talks about 7 sacraments and it talks about charismatic practice.
well,
Yeah,
well,
that's one. You need to get a copy of it. It's not expensive, just for your shelf. I've got it on an app on my phone. They claim that they're 39 articles, 1662 guys, but it's all a lie. It's all a smokescreen because they actually have their own 2019 prayer book, which is closer related to the 1979 than even it is the American 1928. They've got
has
their to be.
Peter reviewed the 2019 Book of Common Prayer?
He's read it. He's not wrote on it. He
Okay.
can't stand it.
Why doesn't he
I
like
mean, because basically, Donald, all it is a conservative revision of the 1979. It is a pick and choose cafeteria liturgy. I mean, it was my argument against the 79 anyway. The statement common prayer implies that everybody's going to be using the same text, correct?
it? Yeah.
It's a lie whenever that text gives multiple options on every service that can be engineered to create 1,500 different services everywhere you go.
Gotcha.
And that's what it does.
Yeah.
But to bring it back to my point, when Anglicanism was confessional, there was a solid biblical foundation because You had the vow and the ordination of the priesthood. You had the vow that the bishops took at their consecration. You had the sixth and seventh article in the 39 articles that espouse the truth of the biblical truths. All of these basically held up Sola Scriptura in the formularies. Once you remove the formularies, there's nothing enforcing Sola Scriptura anymore. The first homily, basically in the priestly ordination, in the bishop's consecration, in the 39 articles, and in the homily, first homily, you have a solid doctrine of Sola Scriptura. When you remove the firewall of the formularies, what happens?
Sure.
And I mean, it was important enough to Cranmer that he wrote the first homily. He pretty much wrote the 39 articles when they were the 42. And he wrote the services of ordination and included all of this in there. It was Cranmer that wrote the Sola Scriptura into the formularies, which means that Anglicanism at its core is, number one, solidly Protestant, and is, number two, focused primarily on the Bible. When you remove the strict subscription, there is nothing holding anybody to it. There's no teeth to anything. You can get this Bishop Budd up there, and I'm going to say this just as a sideways to get it off my chest. I told him in my sermon on Sunday, the worst thing that Bishop Budd did and why she's going to hell right now is not going against Donald Trump in that sermon. It's that she was given a platform that she could have spoke to millions and millions of people and shared the gospel. She could have talked about Jesus Christ. She could have, pardon to use this term, she could have led people to Christ. She could have presented the Christian truth. And instead, she peed all over the Bible. She peed all over Jesus. She peed all over everything, and she took liberal talking points.
Yeah, I'm crafting a letter to the President, Vice President, King Charles III, the Prince of Wales, Cardinal Dolan, the 9 justices of the Supreme Court, my 2 senators, my representative, House of Representatives, several theologians, presidents of the Reformed seminaries in Philadelphia and California, as well as Charlotte, Jackson, Mississippi, Orlando, Washington, D.C., and others. Also the Pope, because I didn't get past the first phrase from her, "I come in God's name." Well, then she bounced off into a couple of her talking points. But I was at the National Cathedral on an Easter Sunday when she spoke. And she said, "You don't have to believe in the resurrection to be a Christian." I nearly fell off my seat. She has gone on in some other areas on her blog where she was asked that question by a parishioner. And she said, "No, you don't have to believe in that outlandish proposition." And then she took off in the Boltmanian direction that we have these experiences of resurrection. We turn around a bad situation. We rise to the occasion. We rise when we have a victory over here. Basically, Boltmanianizing the resurrection. She is a heretic. Reformed Confessionalists affirm, Bishop Pet Buddha denies. Now, and then when she says, "I come in God's name," I'm sorry, you have just profaned and taken God's name in vain.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, in the letter, I mentioned an experience I had at St. George's Episcopal years back in Fredericksburg, Virginia. I'd been up at the Pentagon for a few days, and so I decided to swing down about 60 miles south and go to that historic church. I was in full dress military uniform. It was Ascension Sunday, which deals with the ascension of Christ. Well, the sermon got going, and he read the text. The text was read for Ascension Sunday. And he said, you know, the ascension isn't like, we don't believe it like they used to believe it. We don't believe in the ascension of Jesus Christ. We're more advanced now. It's about Jesus ascending in our heart. Again, Boltmanian.
Right.
Then I told the story in this letter to Boudet about a command chaplain requiring us, three Protestant denominations, that we had to use Sunday school curriculum from the Episcopal Church. I protested because I got an advance copy of it. He denied that request to have an alternate. And my congregation was 100 and growing. His was 10 or 12 and stultified. The other Protestant congregation had about 300. I was out kind of the outpost area, but people were coming. Here I am. They joked, this guy with a collar, man, he's preaching the Bible. Wow, how cool is that? You know, because they were charismatic types. But what I did was gather the Sunday school teachers once a week in my home on the base and go through preparatively for the next Sunday lesson. And it was process theology where God is growing.
Oh, I know process theology.
Yeah, you know that. And we're so much more advanced. God has talked to us. Anyways, he was unamused by that, but for 1 year, we taught how crummy that Sunday school curriculum was and what the biblical truth was. And I taught that with a JAG officer, a lawyer. Him and I team taught the adult Sunday school class. Well, this Boltmanian command chaplain was not amused. And I could tell more stories like that, but these are heretics, Boltmanian heretics. And I got other stories too, but when she said, I come to you in God's name, you know, I had explosions in the mind. And then she weaponized the little word kindness. Let's deal with people in kindness, and weaponized that to mislead the simple and the illiterate and the doctrinally shallow, for the queers and the steers. And she weaponized it and talks about, you know, LBGTQ, you know, and then she talked about kindness for the illegal immigrants. Meanwhile, she's a pro-abortionist.
Right.
She's a pro-murder. She's a heretic and a hypocrite to weaponize the word kind. Jesus was kind, while she endorses mass genocide of babies with their blood drenching the earth. So, and I didn't even get into illegal immigration, but to turn that event into a pee on Trump sermon was, like you said, was to miss the main point of her alleged calling.
How many people could have heard the gospel? I'm sorry, that's what has killed me about this. The platform that was given, how many people could she have reached with Jesus Christ?
Millions.
And it wouldn't have been that hard. She could have given a Billy Graham sermon and got at least got the gospel out there in some form.
Yeah. Well,
sorry, go ahead.
I've been following those that are supportive of her, and also numerous articles have come out against her, which I'm looking at all of it as I prepare this open letter that's going to go quite widely next Monday. I had to buy an extra, couple boxes of envelopes because I'm not used to sending letters. But so she is a heretic, and the illiterates and the eunuchs have no idea. Boltmanianism is the devil's theology. End of story. And that was one of the specialties I had at Westminster Seminary. We were trained to go after, they were teaching us the Bible, of course, and the languages and systematics, but we had as a part of our training forensic theology against, I'm not going to use the word liberal, I'm looking for the deconstructionist deniers, destroyers. That's a better word than liberal. Liberal is a little bit too soft for me.
Well, it's also a vague term. That's why they hide behind it.
Yeah, and I'm with Prof. Machen that it's either Christianity or liberalism, which is not Christianity. And he was emphatic on that point.
But the thing is, and I want to bring this full circle. When we, as confessional Protestants, and I am actually going to include the Lutherans, the particular Baptists, anybody that had a solid confession, biblically centered confession, whether we agreed on all points with each other or not, when we were solidly confessionally Protestant, we did not have to worry about these sort of things.
Yeah.
Because if you look at Westminster, if you look at the 39 articles, if you look at the small Chaldic articles in the Book of Concord, if you look at the 1689 London Baptist Confession, if you look at the Belgic Confession, if you look at the Second Helvetic, if you look at the Augsburg Variata, each and every one of them either has an entire article dedicated to the scripture or alludes to it the entire way. There is, in all of them, a solid back to the Bible emphasis.
Yes. And Cranmer, though he didn't write a lot like Calvin or Bullinger, Bullinger was a writing machine, including letters.
Right.
Nevertheless, it is indisputable that Cranmer was a Sola Scriptura man.
Right.
And he had his fingers into church history and the doctors of history. He read them all.
But so did Calvin. I've been working on this class on Calvin's Institutes. I am currently reading through, I got my copy in yesterday. I have a copy of the 1536. I have a copy of the 1541, and I have 2 copies of the 1559. And I've been going through all 3 of them, comparing and contrasting. I still like the 1541 better thus far, but that's neither here nor there. But I've been going through them. Everybody says Reformed theology doesn't know patristics. Calvin can quote from memory Augustine, Chrysostom. I can go through a list of them. Calvin talks about Augustine and Chrysostom being the 2 pillars upon which most of his theology rests. Calvin talks about Lombard and how Calvin could almost date when the church went really off the rails. Calvin talks about Bernard of Clairvaux. Calvin talks about St. Gregory the Great.
He likes Bernard.
Right. The patristics end of it, all of the magisterial reformers knew their patristics. And really, all of them point out to the church really goes off the rails after Lombard. Lombard is solid. And then everybody from there on out starts to get real wonky real fast. And I think it's a sad state of affairs when you've got the Sola Scriptura, not the Sola Scriptura, that deny the wisdom of these fathers. No, we do not base our doctrine and our theology off of the fathers. We go back to the fathers to show that our understanding of the Bible is correct.
Speaking of Calvin and his institutes and the three editions, with regard to double predestination, often he is caricatured as that's his theology, when in fact 1536 doesn't even mention predestination.
No, it doesn't.
1541, I believe. And I think there's another edition after 1541.
There is a half edition, if that makes any sense. There is a Latin edition and there is a French edition. And the Latin edition would be the proper 1541 that was the academic one. That's the one he wrote in connection with his conversations with Bootzer. He then went back afterward and did a translation of the Latin into French. And what that French translation really is a stepping stone, if that may. It is primarily the 1541, but you can see where it's the stepping stone into the 1559.
Well, those few editions in the 1540s treated double predestination, as is most often done, under the doctrine of God.
Right.
I'm thinking of some of the classical texts over here on the shelf. However, and he was aware of a dangerous handling of the doctrine. But in the 1559 edition, he shifts it away from the doctrine of God and brings it over into connection with soteriology, showing some kind of shift in his thinking as to relocating it. And he has a more pastoral concern in handling it, so that people are not disturbed. He affirms double predestination, but he recognizes some people are going to have difficulty and fear, and he addresses that and says, if you have doubts about that, just focus on Jesus Christ. And Luther says the same thing in the bondage of the will.
I have a theory on why he does what he does.
Okay.
And since I've just recently gone through all, 1536 is explicitly written as a defense of the Reformed faith to Francis I. That is its primary objective. So when people say 1536 is so much smaller, it's smaller primarily because it is written to a degree as a defense, a defensio fide. We are not the Anabaptists. We are not the people you're scared of. We are good contributing citizens. This is what we believe. 1541, since it was written with Bootzer, and it was written during a time period in Strasbourg where Strasbourg was basically becoming a training center for Protestant pastors to go out into other countries, is written primarily as a pastoral theological textbook so that pastors can learn their theology. Hence, predestination is where I would properly say it needs to be as far as under God.
Yeah.
When you get to 1559, and here is my controversial take on this, and I think it is only controversial because people are lazy. I don't think 1559 is written for pastors. I think it is written as a handbook for Christians to be able to better understand their reading of the Bible. And if you read Calvin's commentaries, Calvin, like in his commentary on Psalms, refers people back to the 1559. I said this in Institutes. What 1559 was written for is the same reason why Abrakel wrote A Christian's Reasonable Service or Watson wrote his Body of Divinity. It wasn't necessarily meant to be, it could be used as a theological training textbook, but I think it was primarily meant, and this is just my opinion, and you know what people say about opinions. I think it was primarily written for Christians to have on their shelves, laity to have on their shelves, so that they would get a deeper understanding of what the Bible says.
Like, it is an eminently accessible volume. If
Right.
Calvin is known for anything, among several things, it is his clarity in writing. He is completely different from that awkward fella called Richard Hooker. I just.
Well, I'm gonna make you mad, and I'm gonna throw another one in there. I would add John Owen to that crowd.
Oh, absolutely.
I hate reading Owen.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And I always laugh when all these people say, well, I got so much out of John Owen. I don't think they did. I think they're just saying it to make themselves look smart. Because I'm not saying I'm the smartest thing in shoe leather, but Owen is one of the few people I've read. I have to go back and read 2 or 3 times to just sort of get my head wrapped around what he's trying to say.
Yeah. That's like Turretin a little bit too.
But no, I honestly think 1559 was not meant for the clergy, it was meant for the laity. I think, because I mean, and as I say that, you know, Abrakel wrote A Christian's Reasonable Service for the laity, not for the clergy. Watson wrote A Body of Divinity for the laity, not for the clergy. Now, it's a sad state of affairs that
That's a
even
good.
clergy.
Watson is very accessible.
Yeah, I love A Body of Divinity. Watson and Baxter and Perkins and Ames are my 4 favorite Puritans.
Baxter was an Arminian, wasn't he?
Baxter was a weird dude. That's about the best I can say about him. You could make that argument, but you could also say he wasn't. Baxter, you don't read for his systematic theology. Baxter, you read for his pastoral theology. The Reformed nobody is going to deny the Reformed pastor is one of the finest, but all preachers should have to read the Reformed pastor.
Yep.
All preachers should have a copy of Baxter's Christian Directory. Even though Perkins and Ames sort of start that causality, Baxter perfects it in a Christian Directory. Any question to this day, there's a couple of books. I was telling Andy this the other day. There didn't need to be another preaching manual ever written after William Perkins wrote The Art of Prophesying. He got it perfect. Everything else is a downgrade. All these manuals on preaching and textbooks on preaching are a pale imitation of The Art of Prophesying. Every pastor should be required, and I would say even papist priest and Orthodox priest, because they can derive value out of the Reformed pastor, because it explains what a pastor's duty is in his parish. A Christian directory, you're not going to find a better causality manual anywhere. It covers just about everything.
Well, he was known for really rigorous catechetical work with his people. Mm-hmm. Century later, I guess it was, George Whitefield went through Kidderminster and said that that tradition, that practice had produced a very lively and active people, and he detected in the people of Kidderminster the positive results of Baxter's pastoral work. It's kind of like I kind of view the way you were raised, the way I was raised. I mean, we were catechized, and that
Right.
kept us in the way. I wanted to ask you now, because by the way, Roger DeBerry loves listening to you because, and I don't know about me, but you, because you were in the battle in this seminary and in the
Mhm.
liberal denomination. And he likes to hear those stories because he did not he went through 8 years of, I think it's 8 years of graduate training,
Mhm.
but it was all homogenous. He was not in combat like you were. I mean,
Oh,
you
they didn't
survived all
let me.
that.
They didn't let me preach in Santee Chapel. I was the only student that was not allowed to preach in a chapel service the whole time I was there. Because my first year there, they used to split up the chapel services. They split us up into groups with people from all 3 years. And our advisors were required to set up a week worth of chapel every semester. And we always did communion on Wednesdays. And then basically the first and second year students would get Monday, Tuesday, and Friday because for some reason they didn't do chapel on Thursday. I never understood that. But I got a Tuesday my first year, my first semester. And instead of doing some sort of guided meditation or some sort of full mess that the rest of them were doing, I walked in and preached on, I walked in there and I didn't preach, I did a study on the Heidelberg days 3 and 4, and we talked about sin and how horrible sin is. And after that, I was asked never to participate in a chapel service again. I had a couple of lesbians crying by the end of it because I informed them in the chapel that they were going to burn eternally in hell unless they repented of their lifestyle. I said, Jesus loves you, but he hates the sin that's in you. And if you hold on to that sin, he's going to end up hating you when you're gone, dead and gone. And I was told I was never allowed to speak in the chapel again.
While we're on that subject of the deconstructionists, I'm not going to say liberal, the deniers, the destroyers. I'm trying to get that more into my vocabulary as a routine because you were up against deconstructionists.
Oh, did you know? Hold on, I wanted to say this. Dr. Barrett used to get so mad about this. The only required theology course that they required at Lancaster. Now, Barrett, like I told you, Barrett would take his favorite students aside and do independent studies with us to get us through what we needed to get through. But what he was required to teach was Theology 101, and it was split into 4 sections. They were process theology, neo orthodoxy, sin and salvation. They did get a quarter of the class was dedicated to sin and salvation because we had to read Alvin Plantinga and process theology, neo orthodoxy. Oh, Christus Victor, where we studied the orthodox concept of Christ as being victorious. They
Yep.
made us learn neo orthodoxy. They made us learn process theology. I remember having to read Matthew Fox. I literally took my copy of Creation's Blessings or something like that, Creation Spirituality by Matthew Fox, and set it on fire in the courtyard after we got done with the class in front of a bunch of Wiccans and said, "You want something for your sacrifice? There you go," and threw it and let it burn in the courtyard.
Now, that was Theology 101
Yeah,
semester.
yeah.
And were they advocating process theology?
Oh, the majority of the students and the theology professor was a solid 69 particular. For some reason, in philosophically, he liked Heidegger, and he wrote on Heidegger, and he knew about Heidegger. And for some reason, they thought that meant he was an existentialist, and he may have had some leanings that way. But theologically, Dr. Barrett was a 1689 strict confessionalist, particular Baptist. He grew up primitive Baptist, and that's what he was.
So he taught process theology, but not sympathetically.
Right. And I know he wasn't sympathetic because me and John Bailey and William Sowers and a couple of his chosen, we were the frozen chosen, is what the process theologians called us. He pulled us aside and we did a class on Calvin's Institutes. We did a class on the Book of Concord. We did a class where he gave us a brief overview of Reformed theology. And he did parts of Turretin, he did parts of Ursinus, and he taught Mercersbury Theology. And my second semester of Mercersbury Theology was a concentration on the Ursinus's commentary on the Heidelberg Catechism.
So let's talk about your systematics. That was one class. What were some of the others in systematics?
They didn't teach anything else.
Only one class?
That was all that was required, was really one class.
One semester.
One semester.
Oh boy.
One semester of theology, 2 semesters of church history, 4 semesters of Greek, 2 semesters of Hebrew, 2 semesters on the Old Testament, 2 semesters on the New Testament, 8 semesters on pastoral theology, 1 semester on homiletics. They were real big into pastoral theology. We had to take pastoral counseling. I mean, I got to give them this. Their structure was primarily based on generating functional parish pastors. All right. And I'm going to defend the devil in saying this. It was done all the wrong way, but their primary concern was putting people into pulpits. Because Lancaster had developed a reputation early on because it was surrounded by Princeton, by Yale, by Harvard, going all the way back. It had all these academic institutions near it. What Lancaster developed a reputation for, even when it was Orthodox, besides Mercersbury Theology, was producing functional pastors. You know how some people can be so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good?
I would say that of Westminster Seminary. They did not produce pastors. They did not produce pastoral counselors. What they did was pure headwork and defending the Bible. At that, they were good. And
they were good at it.
For that, I am ever appreciative, especially when I went off into the Navy chaplaincy and I was dealing with every cat and dog in the Protestant world. I forever was thankful that I had a forensic background, but homiletics, we had a bad joke at the seminary that we do the head work and the evangelicals do the legwork. In other words, we write the books, we defend scripture, we write commentaries, so forth. And it's the evangelicals out there who read our stuff. I may have told you this story before. I was invited to speak by a fellow worker at his college. He was the president of the class, and they met every so often at Valley Forge Christian Academy College, just a tad north of Philadelphia. And it had charismatic roots. And I was invited to speak to the class. I got there early, and I'm roaming around through the library, and I'm seeing all these books written by Reformed men. I'm going, wow. Well, we got up on the dais, and my friend introduced the president of the college, who got up and turned to me. I'm sitting on the dais and said, where are you going to school? I said, I'm going to Westminster Theological Seminary. He goes, oh, that little tiny school. Oh, that's nothing. Well, so much for the charity. Well, then I got my turn to speak, and I got up and I turned and I looked at him. And I said, see all those books over there? They're written by our men, Reformed men. And so we do the head work while you all can do the leg work. And that kind of brought out a chuckle. And then I proceeded to give my little sermonette or whatever it was. But Westminster didn't have that pastoral angle that you're mentioning. Now, was Lancaster, because I went to Mercersburg and saw a building or a school up over there.
All right, Lancaster is Mercersburg.
Same
They
location?
moved.
Same
No, no,
building?
no, 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 no. When Franklin College and Marshall College, which were both Reformed schools, were merged, they were headquartered and merged in Lancaster. So what they did is they were building the campus, they built a new campus for the seminary and moved the seminary from Mercersburg to Lancaster.
Yeah, because there was a building, I think that was the old Mercersburg Seminary, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, there was, but they moved it to Lancaster whenever because basically until the formation of the UCC, the seminary was the graduate school for Franklin and Marshall. Because we had three colleges. You had Heidelberg College in Tiffin, Ohio. You had Catawba College in Salisbury, North Carolina. And you had Franklin and Marshall in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And then we had two graduate schools because they would not give us North Carolinians our own seminary. So you had Ursinus Seminary in Tiffin, Ohio, attached to Heidelberg, and you had Mercersburg/Lancaster attached to Franklin and Marshall in Pennsylvania.
So as for Lancaster, you took a year, 2 semesters on Mercersburg Theology.
Yes.
How would you summarize those 2 courses?
Those 2 courses were incredibly solid, and they were incredibly solid because no matter how bad the liberals railed against it, Dr. John Payne and Dr. Ann Thayer and Dr. Lee Barrett team taught it. The endowment that pays for the Mercersburg lectures requires them to be taught and requires them to be taught strictly. I mean, there's like a book of paperwork that goes along with that endowment, and it literally pays for some professorships. So they can't deviate from it. It showed me, I had my issues with some elements of Mercersburg theology. The majority of them come from Philip Shaw, not from John Williamson Nevin. And they stem from Schaff's relationship with Neander and then therefore his relationship with Hegel. But Mercersburg theology, for all of its failings, is basically a defense of what Presbyterians would call the old lights. It is a return to a stricter, more confessional version of liturgical Protestantism. A lot of what they yelled about, and you hear these arguments, these Romanizing germs, even amongst us, weren't actually Romanizing. It was a return to a stricter use of the Platinate liturgy over against the revivalism. And if you look at the different parts of the Mercersburg liturgy, the ones that don't come directly from the 1789 Book of Common Prayer are nothing more than them actually enforcing the use of the Platinate. The confession of sin, the full canon in communion, the full canon in baptism, they were what Ursinus wrote, because what had happened in the German Reformed tradition was the same thing that was happening with the Presbyterians. It's why Hodge and Nevin got into a fight, and everybody tends to miss out on this fact. Hodge had picked Nevin to be his successor.
Oh,
Hodge had trained Nevin. When Hodge left to do his European tour, Hodge called Nevin from Western Theological Seminary to take over all of his classes at Princeton. Nevin taught at Western Theological Seminary before coming to Mercersbury. Nevin's grandfather was a signer of the Declaration of Independence from North Carolina. Nevin was raised an Old Light Presbyterian.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Nevin,
if he taught at Western, maybe he was there when B.B. Warfield was there. I don't know.
no, he would have been before Warfield, I think. I think Warfield's younger than him.
Okay.
I know Warfield's younger than him anyway. But Nevin was raised a strict Westminster guy.
Okay, didn't know that.
But where he ran into a wall were the New Lights and the revivalism.
Yeah.
And you can see it in his book. Probably his most famous book is called The Anxious Bench.
Okay.
And it's written directly against revivalistic practices. And Nevin and Hodge had their first major falling out over Nevin's complaints to Hodge about the allowances that were being made for the Congregational Cooperation and Missionary Societies and for the introduction of revivalistic ideas within Princeton's curriculum. There are a series of there are a series of letters that I wish could get published, and I know they never will, that are Nevin writing to Hodge complaining about the Hodge abandoning Turretin to write his own systematics.
Okay.
And it wasn't, if you read them, and the only reason I read them is I got to see the original copies when I was working in the library at the seminary. Nevin is not saying Hodge doesn't know what he's talking about. He is trying to warn Hodge that in leaving Turretin and going to his own systematics, he is opening doors. That's where I actually get that term from, is from Nevin himself.
Interesting. I've wondered about, they still read Turretin during Hodge's time?
Yeah, Hodge taught out of Turretin to start with because everybody at Princeton was required to go through Turretin.
Yeah, and
it was the New Light movement that pushed Turretin out and encouraged Hodge to write his own systematics because they had to learn Latin at that point in time to read Turretin.
Yeah. It's time for me to go back through the 3-volume Hodge set. I'm working in Turretin right now, and that's going to keep me busy for a long time. And I am sad that we did not use Turretin in seminary.
Well, Turretin would have corrected a bunch of problems right off the bat because Turretin addresses everything.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
And the thing, but no, Lancaster, because Mercersburg theology is primarily driven by an incarnational sense. And Nevin actually drew from his Old Light Presbyterian background in this. It is driven by an idea that the catechism should be something that is taught in the family daily, along with Bible readings. It is something that should be preached on in church. And I mean, if you were a solidly Mercersburg congregation, you took communion 4 times a year. And I get asked why it's only 4 times a year. I jokingly say it takes the better part of 2 hours if you include a sermon and a communion service to get through Sunday morning. But that's neither here nor there. It was 4 times a year because the elders were required, not the pastor, the elders were required to divide the laity in the congregation up into quadrants, that each one of the elders had a responsibility. And before they could take communion, the elders had to come and visit you at home, interview the parents, the children, everybody in the household, and make sure that they were learning their Heidelberg Catechism. When I say incarnational, I mean, in the purest sense, it was about bringing Christ into the world by bringing a full-throated Christian worldview to every aspect of life. The elders were trained, and it's even in the ENR, which is the old Mercersbury liturgy for the ordination and installation of elders and deacons. I just read it again this year. The elders are to be the eyes and ears, hands and feet of the pastor amongst the congregation. The elders are supposed, and when I teach my elders and deacons class, I tell the elders, what you need to view yourselves as is not one of the sheep. You're now a sheepdog. And I tell them, do not take it as an insult. I said, me as the pastor, I am the shepherd. I'm standing above the flock and I'm looking out and I can see the lions and the bears charging from far off. But you're the sheepdogs, and I cannot operate without my sheepdogs, because whereas I can take care of the lions and bears, I can't handle the snakes that are coming up from the grass that I can't see because the sheep are standing over them. I tell the elders, you are my sheepdogs. You are on the ground with the sheep. You have to kill those snakes, or at least alert me that those snakes are there so I can deal with them. And it's this incarnational idea. We must be with our laity. We must be interacting with our laity. We must not be afraid to discipline our laity. We must not be afraid to bind up our laity's wounds. We must be servant leaders that are with the people.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I got to go, Donald. I just realized It's 10:57.
All right. Sounds good. And God willing, see you Friday.
See you. I'm going to have to get off on Friday about 10:40, 10:45.
Okay, that's
just
good.
to give you a heads up.
Okay, sounds good. I'll see you later, brother.
All right, bye.
Bye.